Representative Norris, Senate File 856 was still in the possession of the committee, so we will just take it up because it was effectively laid over when the gavel fell on Thursday of last week. So here's how we would like to do things. I am going to make the motion to bring the bill up. I will then again move what I believe is your first amendment you would like to do, which is your DE amendment. We will then discuss the DE amendment, and then we will proceed from there on the other amendments that you've brought forward. So if you would, to your DE that I have now moved before the committee.
Great. Thank you, Chair Nash and members of the committee. It's good to be with you again this morning. Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation around this particular bill, and I think what's clear is that we've got the same goals here, eliminating fraud in Minnesota. It's just that we have some slightly different ideas of exactly how to go about doing that, and that's fine. The author's amendment that I brought forward last week and bring forward again today keeps 90% of the Senate bill, including key features of independence while enhancing others and fixing unconstitutional provisions that are currently in the Senate version. I also, in my author's amendment, offer some suggestions for improving upon the Senate version of the bill. For instance, focusing on both prevention and the investigation of fraud. It is critical that this office have strong investigative powers, and I keep those strong investigative powers in my author's amendment. But we know that it's very hard to recover fraudulently stolen dollars once they've gone out the door. So it behooves us to also focus on shoring up the prevention side of fighting fraud. And that's where I think this office can play a really critical role in making sure that every single state agency is doing the best possible work to prevent fraud from occurring in the first place. Second, I want to make sure that we fully fund the office. We need this office to be able to get down to business on day one. You would not ask someone to go bake a cake for you and then only give them the money for some of the ingredients that they need. Similarly, a fiscal note was prepared for the Senate bill, and unfortunately, when the bill passed the Senate, it did not fully fund all of the anticipated costs of establishing and running this office. I think it's really important that we give such a critical office the tools and resources it needs. And so my author's amendment proposes to fully fund the work of the office. I also think it's important to eliminate duplication where it is unnecessary. We have, for instance, a financial crimes division within the BCA that is already doing really good and important work of investigating and arresting fraudsters. It is very expensive, on the other hand, to set up a new small law enforcement agency within the Office of the Inspector General. So my author's amendment still retains the investigative powers that this office needs. For instance, it has the ability to issue subpoenas. But if there's someone who needs to be arrested, they can work with the BCA to effectuate that arrest. And lastly, my author's amendment allows us to continue to rely on subject matter experts. It's important that people who are ensuring program integrity have a strong understanding of the programs that they are overseeing, the type of work that gets done, the type of funds that go out the door. And so my author's amendment proposes that we keep existing inspectors general, specifically the MDE one, because all the other ones are already left in their agencies under the Senate bill. And then the centralized OIG will oversee the work of those agencies and those inspectors general within the agencies to make sure they're adhering to best practices, doing their work in a competent and professional manner, but it still allows us to maintain that subject matter expertise that's really critical. It's clear now that the author's amendment that I brought forward on Thursday was probably a bridge too far. So today, we're hoping if the author's amendment that I initially offered is not accepted by the committee again, to kind of chip away with some smaller amendments, some page and line amendments to start debating ideas and trying to start coming to some consensus on this bill. Bills get better over time, and I'm willing to work with everyone who's interested in achieving that goal. And with that, Chair Nash, I think we've got some testifiers. Is that right?
Thank you, Representative Norris. We're going to first discuss the DE, as was my desire last week, but I wanted to preface the discussion that we have with a document that we put into your packets for those that are here in the committee. Representative Norris, last week you had shared that the DE was something that you worked on in conjunction with the Senate author, and then we heard later in the day on the floor that it was worked on with the Senate author and the governor's office. The senator actually put out a press release that said that that was not accurate. And being accurate is something that this committee always strives to do. Certainly the DE has merits. There's some things in there that I think you would find that we like in conversations with us. But I found it remarkable that the Senate author distanced herself from the DE. So I wanted to make sure that members saw that. But then also in the document, I believe starting on page 3, is a document that we got from a data request with the governor's office and the OIG Coordinating Council. And if you go down to, I believe it's page 5 of that particular document, page 6, sorry, the statewide OIG, it says in that area that the governor's office wishes to find a different approach than Senator Gustafson's bill. Now, here's what I'll say about Senator Gustafson's bill. It is not just a Senate DFL bill. It is a bipartisan, bicameral bill that was worked on by yourself, Representative Anderson, Representative Cleaborn was there, Senator Gustafson, Senator Cruen, and a cast of thousands, if you will, going back to movie days. And the recognition that I have of that effort is one that shows that a wholesale change like your DE, and you said last week it's a big departure from the current bill, that raises questions. And it raised questions for a lot of us, like where did this come from? And after we found out that it was not something that was done in conjunction with Senator Gustafson, and then we find the document from the governor's OIG Coordinating Council, it can only surmise from my perspective that it was something that the governor had wanted, because perhaps the governor didn't want the OIG bill that was transmitted from the Senate. Regardless, I think that it's important to make sure that we're going on record to set things straight. Once again, I would love nothing more than the OIG bill to become law, but there are bills and then there are bigger bills that are sort of an enterprise-wide approach. And I think that's what this approach is, where you need, as often as we make jokes about them, we do need the Senate to help us, and we need to help them. And the work was done in such a manner that I think there were only 7 dissenting votes in the Senate. And that's remarkable. So I think that it is important that we make sure that information that we're talking about or that we put out into the public is accurate. And with that, we'll open it up to questions on your DE amendment. I believe Representative Davis was on the list. He's got questions first, and then we will go through. And again, we are going to discuss the DE, unlike last week, and then we will move on to a vote, and then we will get to the rest of your amendments as well. Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Norris. A question I have, I got a few, but you said Senate File 856 that it did not fully fund the office. Can you go into detail about that? What specifically are you talking about?
Representative Norris.
Chair Nash, Representative Davis, there was a fiscal note that was generated on the Senate version of the bill, and The fiscal note funded it at a certain amount. I don't have the exact number, or recommended it, said to establish and run the office in the way that is prescribed in the Senate bill, it's going to cost X dollars. I think it was something around $12 million a biennium. The Senate bill included specific appropriations that were far less than the $12 million the fiscal note said was going to be required in order to establish the office and run the office as prescribed in the Senate bill.
Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But, so what prescription, like, that's what I'm trying to find out. What specifically wasn't funded?
Representative Norris.
So, Chair Nash, Representative Davis, it's not like it included specific line items and said this specific thing wasn't funded, this specific thing wasn't funded. Instead, the way these things work is a fiscal note goes to each of the different agencies and says, look at this bill, look at what you are tasked with doing, and come up with an estimate for how much it's going to cost to do that work. And then it gets all packaged together. Then, typically, when we get a fiscal note, it's standard practice that either it's just sent out and assumed that the fiscal note is going to be fully funded, or they include a specific line item appropriating in the bill the amount of the fiscal note. Instead, what happened this time is it said, okay, we're only going to, for instance, it said it was going to cost X dollars for running the specific office of the Inspector General. The Senate bill only funded a portion of that amount of money for the specific office of the Inspector General, and did the same for many of the other state agencies that said they were going to incur costs in terms of either starting or implementing this office.
Representative Davis.
Okay, it sounds like you don't know, so I'm going to move on. So our governor, he's failed to exercise his executive powers of oversight and accountability, obviously. And just another quick question. Are you aware of how much Medicaid fraud has taken place in this state since 2018?
Representative Norris.
Chair Nash, Representative Davis, yes.
Okay,
Representative Davis.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Allegedly, at least $9 billion. Okay, so we're over $1 billion worth of Medicaid fraud per year on average. He's also failed to act on warnings of fraud along with Democrat legislators as well. During 23-24 biennium, I mean, we were screaming from the rooftops about all the fraud going on, and we were seemingly ignored. So why does your DE5 give the governor basically all the authority to choose who he wants to be the Inspector General? To me, that is the fox guarding the hen house. Why are you going that direction with your DE5?
Representative Norris, would you like Representative Davis to reference the line that, okay, just trying to make sure that, yeah.
No, I
Representative Norris.
appreciate that, Chair Nash. Chair Nash, Representative Davis, first, I will reject the notion that nothing was done on fraud in 23 and 24. You can go back and look. There were several significant anti-fraud packages that were passed in that year or 2 years. But to your specific question, unfortunately, there's a thing called the Constitution, and it's a good thing in my view. It might be unfortunate in your view. In my view, it's a good thing that we've got a Constitution, and it lays out the parameters, the rules by which we have to legislate. And the Constitution requires that if this office is going to be established in the executive branch, that the governor has to have the authority to appoint whomever he or she wants. That is something that I think there's pretty universal understanding among constitutional lawyers about. And so as a result, we have to allow the governor to appoint whomever he or she wants under this Office of the Inspector General because it is in the executive branch. However, I agree that independence is really important with this office, which is why collectively, as working with the Senate, working with the House GOP author, we came up with a number of other protections to try to make this office as independent as possible within the executive branch. So you'll notice in my author's amendment, the very first line, line 1.6, it clearly states, the Inspector General serves as an independent entity in the executive branch responsible for ensuring accountability, transparency, and integrity in the operations of state agencies and programs. And you'll notice a little bit further down, lines 1.11 and 1.12, says, except as provided by law, the Inspector General is not subject to direction or interference from any executive or legislative authority. But we go further. We first establish a bipartisan legislative Inspector General Advisory Commission. This is a commission of 2 Democrats from the House, 2 Democrats from the Senate, 2 Republicans from the House, 2 Republicans from the Senate. They will recommend candidates to the governor. It takes 5 of those 8 members to recommend candidates. So you need to have support from both Democrats and Republicans to get recommended. Then the Senate must confirm the governor's choice with a 3/5 vote. There is a 5-year term, so it doesn't coincide with the term of the governor. That was another piece that we thought was important. It requires a 3/5 confirmation of the Senate upon reappointment. There's a prohibition on all partisan activities for all OIG employees that's included in the bill. And then on the removal side, again, to protect this office from partisan influence, the Inspector General can only be removed for cause with a public hearing, and under the author's amendment that I'm bringing forward, it would require 3/5 of the Senate and 3/5 of the House to remove the Inspector General. So while complying with the Constitution, we try to do everything we can to insulate this office and provide as much independence as possible.
Thank you, Representative Norris. Representative Davis, very short,
Yep,
because we
yep.
have other people who would like to talk, and we have other amendments to dispose of, and a couple of bills that are waiting on deck. So to your brief question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you being such a champion for the Constitution, as I am. Maybe you can join me in helping us protect our Second Amendment rights. But which ones specifically, educate me, please, because you said that there were a number of, this was part of your testimony just now, anti-fraud packages brought forth in the 23-24 biennium. Can you please explain that to me? Which anti-fraud packages are you specifically talking about?
Representative Norris, very briefly.
Chair Nash, Representative Davis, I don't have the list at my disposal right now, but I'd be happy to pass that on to you afterward.
Representative Davis, thank you. Next on the list, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Norris, I appreciate your thoroughness, the way you just answered Representative Davis's questions. I have a question for you. Did you ever claim that Senator Gustafson was involved in drafting the Delete Everything Amendment?
Representative Norris.
Chair Nash, Representative Kraft, I appreciate that question. So I certainly did have conversations with Senator Gustafson about this amendment. Meetings, lots of different conversations along the way. Did I sit down and get my pencil out with her and draft up the specific language with her? No, but there were lots of meetings and lots of conversations along the way.
Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Chair Nash. What I don't understand about this DE is that in every committee that I've been in since been in the legislature, when an author brings an amendment to start out the process, we accept it. And I don't understand why it wasn't done. And then if you had amendments to offer them. You've clearly done a tremendous amount of work on this. In the same release that you put in our packet, Senator Gustafson appreciates your work and respecting this process. So I still do not understand why we cannot just accept this amendment and then do amendments from there, which I've seen done everywhere else.
Well, Representative Kraft, I'll address the.
I'm not finished, if I may.
Well, I will address part of your question, since it was me that pointed out that we were not going to accept the DE. So I'll answer your first part of your question. We're having discussion right now, right? We didn't have discussion last week. There was zero discussion allowed on the DE, and yet you're participating in a discussion, pointing out a juxtaposition to my point from last week. It is not a fait accompli. We do not necessarily always take authors' amendments. There have been a number of occasions, including Wednesday of last week in a different committee, where DFL members refused to put authors' amendments onto bills. So QED, it's been done. And it was our perspective, my perspective, that if you'll remember, I talked about stakeholders. Inasmuch as you need one vote to get anything out of this committee, you should be working with stakeholders. And that was not done. The DE that was posted was not run past any of us. I think Representative Anderson is here somewhere in the room. She didn't know about it. It was just posted. And it was a large departure from the bill that was transmitted from the Senate. So if we're going to talk about process, knowing that we're in a tied house, knowing that you need a vote to get something out of committee, wouldn't it have made sense, and I'll say this rhetorically, wouldn't it have made sense to let the Republican chair of the committee know that you had a DE that was fairly large and encompassing? And wouldn't it have made sense to perhaps talk to some of the members of the Republican side of the aisle to see if they could get some votes out of them, instead of just posting the DE and then having shock and awe that we wouldn't take the amendment? Back to you, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also, in your discussion here, I heard you impugn motives of Representative
certainly
Norris.
did not.
Oh, I most certainly did when you talked about how the governor got involved and suddenly we had a different approach or something along those lines. And
Well,
so,
Representative Kraft, did you read the document where it says that the governor would like to pursue a different bill than the Gustafson bill? If you hadn't, I recommend it. It's great reading.
Mr. Chair, I don't really care what the governor likes or wants to do. That is what we choose here in this body to do. That is our responsibility. And I know, and having many conversations with Representative Norris, that we're not doing the bidding of the governor in any of this work. So you have been impugning motives to me, to my party, to Representative Norris, and I really resent that. I have concerns, and I've spoken to Representative Norris about this extensively. I have concerns separate from whether the governor can, whatever he thinks about this bill. So, to start this meeting the way you did, and then to go on and impugn our motives, I find it reprehensible. So, now that we're having discussion, I hope that Representative Norris is given the courtesy of authors, and that we adopt this DE5.
Representative Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I read through this and I hear about, we got silence last week. So, that set the tone for the year. That was done by the chair here. I look at this and I see 60-7 this passed the Senate. The people that voted against this were 7 Democrats. Republicans bipartisan with this. Then you gotta go massage this bill. Did you talk to the 7 people that did not vote for this to figure out what was wrong, why they would not vote it? The 7 Democrats? I understand one of them's no longer here because they had a little criminal case, but when we go and do this and think we have to turn around, and Democrats and Kupek has went back in district, campaigning that he passed this, but the House didn't, take this bill up. Republicans were on board with this. Then we feel we gotta play games because the governor's recommendation, under his fraud that he's allowed in the state of Minnesota, to change this. This is what we feel we gotta bring forward. Not just a simple amendment, if it was changing the fiscal note of this, it's a huge packet, 25 pages. Front to back is what we feel we need to do. I think this is way overreaching. I don't think we should even let this out of the committee. Let's continue with the original bill that the 60-7, which was no Republicans said no to this, all voted for this in the Senate. Let's move this forward if we're gonna be serious, or we can continue sitting here in this committee and use this as a campaign speech. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I'd request a roll call on the DE, please.
I was going to make that motion myself. Roll call having been requested, the clerk will take the roll.
Chair Nash,
No.
Representative Cleaborn,
Aye.
Representative Davis,
No.
Representative Bonner,
Yes.
Representative Anderson,
Anderson, no.
Representative Clardy,
Aye.
Representative Freiberg,
Yes.
Representative Jones,
Aye.
Representative Joy,
No.
Representative Kosnick, Representative Kraft,
Aye.
Representative Luger Nicolai,
Aye.
Representative Quam,
No.
Representative Sexton,
No.
The vote being 7 ayes, 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. So Representative Kraft, Representative Kraft, Representative Norris, you have a series of other amendments, and we have them in front of us. So I will move your A1 to come before the committee.
Thank you, Chair Nash. The A1 amendment gets at what we were just discussing with Representative Davis. This requirement that under the Constitution, if we place this office in the executive branch, and I think there's a lot of compelling reasons why it should be in the executive branch, to comply with the Constitution, the separation of powers principles, the governor ultimately has to be the one to appoint the person. I talked about the safeguards that are already in the bill to try to ensure independence, but this amendment that we're bringing forward is designed to get the bill into a form where it is constitutional. My understanding is that this amendment is consistent with the kind of the understanding that everyone had last year as part of the 4 caucus talks that were occurring around this bill.
Thank you, Representative Norris, and I see that Representative Freiberg would like a roll call. Here's what I'll say, Representative Norris. I really do appreciate you broken out some of your amendments. I think that there are portions and parts of your DE that you've broken out that you'll see that we actually are going to accept some of them. I think that some of the other ones are worthy of conversation with the larger group that has been working on this. So yourself, Representative Cleaborn, Representative Anderson over there, the senators. I think that when you hear no on some of these, please don't think that we don't like them per se, but that we wish that that the good work that you did last year meeting, I think you met on a weekly basis on, was it Tuesday? Mm-hmm. Okay, so on the Tuesday meetings, that you bring this back to that group and begin to continue that conversation. In the conversations I've had with senators and Representative Anderson and others, they do recognize that there are portions of things that are in here that are worthy of perhaps working in, and much like you did before, talking through it and offering slightly different approaches to things might make them a little bit better. So please don't hear when we may vote some of these down that it's an outright no, that we don't want to do them, but more so that we think that going back to the bipartisan, bicameral approach is really where this is going to shine and make this a better bill. So I think Representative Anderson, I'm going to ask her to come up towards the tail end of things to talk about her commitment to doing this. But discussion to the A1, we've largely talked about this, but Representative Kosnick to the A1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the author. I've done some work over the years on Met Council reform. We've had a lot of discussion with the other chair. And one of the big hangups is that they are appointed at the sole discretion of the governor, and they basically become political pawns. And we've had discussions on how to change that and reform that, and for a variety of reasons, we're not quite there yet. But the independence of the legislature to have influence on that isn't unconstitutional. And so I get a little concerned when you throw that out there a little cavalierly. So I'm not going to support this amendment. I think the legislature has the independence. It's our job, and we can influence that. And we don't need to continue to cede either through rulemaking or this type of amendment to the executive branch, independent of whoever the governor is in the executive branch. The legislature, I think, over my term, has continually deferred way too much to the administration, whether it's commissioners or the governor himself. I think we do have the right and actually the responsibility to narrow in through that task force who really is independent, and it does not need to be the governor's free choice of anybody. We can narrow that down, and so members, I would encourage legislative independence and not support this A1 amendment.
Thank you, Representative Koznick. Representative Bonner. And then if I could just ask, we've largely talked about a lot of these in the DE. I want to keep us moving along because there's several more that we'd like to dispose of. So Representative Bonner.
Thank you for that. I did want to say, it's clear that this is a deliberative body. We work through information on different scales. There's a reason that we pass things through the Senate, and then we do an independent review here in the House as well. For whatever reason, this particular provision got missed in the Senate version, and it does have some constitutionality challenges, is my understanding. And we could certainly ask Mr. Sullivan, if necessary, to come up and speak to that. But I know we are pressed for time. But I just wanted to say, to the point of independence here, and I want to thank the bill's author in particular, because not only do we create this bipartisan commission to vet candidates and recommend 3 candidates, we also need to be able to pass that with a 3/5 majority in both the House and Senate. And while this bill keeps constitutionality and does allow for the governor to select a candidate as well, I think it's fairly obvious to any untrained eye that in order to get that 3/5 majority in the House and the Senate, it's highly likely that the governor is going to want to choose one of those 3 candidates recommended by that bicameral or bipartisan group of legislators. And so by that stretch, we are not abdicating any authority of the legislature. In fact, we are including those voices here, but then also including those voices of the legislature in a second fail stop in which we get that 3/5 majority. So we ensure that independence, but we also nudge the governor in the right direction. And I think that is extremely important. But moreover, I want to conclude with just suggesting here that making sure that bills are constitutional before they go to the floor and before they go out, and that we can actually implement them on day one, is very, very important. And certainly, we do not want this bill to be held up by constitutional challenges in the courts. So I think I would urge members to vote yes on the A1.
Okay, seeing no other members seeking recognition, the clerk will take the roll on the A1.
Chair Nash.
Nope.
Representative Cleaborn.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
No.
Representative Bonner.
Aye.
Representative Anderson. Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy. Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam.
No.
Representative Sexton.
No.
There being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Kraft, your A2 is now before the committee. Or, sorry, I will get this fixed. Representative Norris, Representative Kraft is just in my mind today. Representative Norris, your A2 is before the committee.
Thank you, Chair Nash. The A2 amendment is again trying to just tighten up some language that has raised some heartburn about kind of how this office would operate within the framework of the Constitution, the different branches of government. In particular, there's in the Senate version of the bill, I'm pulling up the lines here. There is on 319 to 320, there's a sentence that says the Inspector General must not be subject to direction or interference from any executive or legislative authority. And I can tell you from the talks that we had and the conversation today, you know, the point of that sentence is to make it clear that we want this office to be as independent as possible. However, there is concern from folks that the way that that line is drafted could be interpreted as us saying that this new office that we would be creating is not even subject to following the laws that we pass as the legislature, which is not our intent. Obviously, any executive branch agency should be subject to the laws of the state of Minnesota that we pass as a legislative body. This was actually something, you know, just to be honest, that came up. You know, I've mentioned dozens of different people related to this bill. One of the people that I talked to was the legislative auditor, and the legislative auditor actually flagged this as a potential concern. And so, what we're proposing in this amendment is basically to just change this slightly to clarify that, except as provided by law, the Inspector General is not subject to direction or interference from any executive or legislative authority. So that except as provided by law clause is really critical because it indicates that while we want this entity to be as independent as possible, not subject to interference, it obviously is still subject to any laws that we pass as the legislature of the state of Minnesota.
Thank you, Representative Norris. Roll call has already been requested. So I think this is one of those ones where we want you to continue working with a larger group. I think that there's merit here. I think that some of the feedback that we've heard is that other opinions on how to approach this have been offered or would like to be heard. So would very much encourage you to continue seeking out the opinion of the different members who you've been working with. But at this moment, I'm going to recommend a no vote, not because we don't like it, but we think that it's worthy of working with a larger group. So members, discussion to the A2 before we go to a vote? Seeing none, clerk will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
No.
Representative Cleavorn.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
No.
Representative Bonner. Representative Anderson. Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy. No. Representative Koznick. No. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam.
No.
Representative Sexton.
No.
There being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Norris, your A3 is now before the committee. To the A3.
Chair Nash, the A3 amendment updates all the dates in the bill, excuse me, to push them out a year. The bill, as drafted and passed through the Senate, contemplated it starting essentially its work in 2025. Since we're now in the 2026 session, it kicks all those dates out 1 year.
Thank you, Representative Norris. I don't believe there's going to be a need for a roll call. We are recommending a yes vote on the A3. Any discussion to the A3 now that we've, seeing none, the clerk, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I was not made aware of that, but if roll call being requested, roll call will be granted. Chair votes aye.
Chair Nash.
Aye.
Representative Cleavorn.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Bonner.
Aye.
Representative Anderson. Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy.
Aye.
Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam. Representative Sexton.
Aye.
There being 14 ayes and 0 nays, the amendment is adopted. Representative Norris, Your A4 is now before the committee. To the A4.
With a roll call requested.
Madam Chair, I agreed to take all of your roll calls. You do not need to make a motion
Awesome.
after that.
Thank you so much.
Happy to help. To the A4.
Thank you, Chair Nash. The A4 amendment is the first in a series of amendments looking at the powers and duties of the office, in particular, trying to enhance the ability of this office to help state agencies prevent fraud rather than just investigating it after the fact. We've talked a lot already about the benefits as I see it regarding that, so I don't need to go into that whole explanation. But this amendment in particular would allow the OIG to establish standards and best practices for preventing fraud that would occur or would be applied across the entire state agent or state enterprise, and also allow the OIG to review agencies' compliance with those best practices.
Thank you, Representative Norris. I think this is another one where we feel that there's merit here, but I would love you to continue working with other stakeholders to perfect the amendment. I think that there's great merit here. And while I say that, we are going to recommend a no vote on this. And once again, encourage you to continue working. I think that there's no such thing as a perfect amendment, but a more perfect amendment that we could possibly achieve. So Representative Quam has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question, but specifically, my concerns in this are there are many bills that are looking at putting in statute some processes, and those should take precedence. The legislative auditor also has recommendations, and those should be also followed. So language that's compatible with the Office of Legislative Auditor and, you know, stuff we pass. So I see that this wording needs improvement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Anyone else? Seeing none, roll call having been requested, the clerk will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
No.
Representative Cleavorn.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
No.
Representative Bonner.
Aye.
Representative Anderson.
Anderson, no.
Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy. Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam.
No.
Representative Sexton.
No.
There being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Norris, the A5 is now before the committee. To the A5.
Thank you, Chair Nash. The A5 is another amendment that tries to add to the powers and duties of the office to try to focus on preventing fraud in addition to investigating it. In the state enterprise, we have two types of agencies. We have agencies that have their own inspectors general and agencies that don't. This amendment would say that, or says that the OIG should support the work of those agency inspectors general, and then for those agencies that do not have their own inspectors general, that they can go in and conduct an inspection to make sure that there is still program integrity within those agencies that do not have their own inspector general.
And thank you, Representative Norris. Again, I think this is one of those ones that's really close, and we're encouraging you to continue working with the stakeholders. Having heard from some of them that they would like to talk to you about this and maybe tweak it a little bit, and we have time to get that done. So with that, I'm going to recommend a no vote. Any questions to the A5? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
No.
Representative Cleavorn.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
No.
Representative Bonner.
Yes.
Representative Anderson. Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy. Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam. Representative Sexton.
Nope.
There being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Norris, the A6 is now before the committee. To the A6.
Thank you, Chair Nash. The A6 is another amendment meant to help this office prevent fraud from occurring. One of the, as we've done different reviews of what has led to the problems we're seeing here in Minnesota, it's become clear that one of the challenges is something that's common across a lot of large entities, corporations, organizations, where it's sometimes, the right hand doesn't necessarily know what the left hand is doing, and there's a need for more coordination and information sharing across the entire state enterprise. So this amendment would task the Office of the Inspector General with facilitating that important information sharing between agencies. They would be responsible for helping to coordinate investigations and then alerting other agencies of suspected fraud. So if we're seeing suspected fraud against one agency, we can make sure that the other agencies are on alert for it.
Very good. Thank you, Representative Norris. I think this is one of the ones that you'll be pleased that we are recommending a yes vote on. I think this is a well-written amendment and encourage its adoption. We have questions. Representative Bonner to the amendment briefly.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. I think one of the most common things I hear from the public in general is this conversation about why aren't we able to share information across agencies and be able to use that to our advantage to stop some of that fraud at the outset and prevent it from happening. We know it's much more costly and much more difficult to recover those funds in the end. And I wanted to speak to this one specifically because it talks about facilitating information sharing between agencies. As many of you know, Representative Nash and I sit on the Governor's Technical Advisory Council. There is actually a special subcommittee as a part of that on data sharing. And we've been talking about the ability of our agencies to better communicate with one another for just this reason. In fact, that effort has been going on for many, many years, well beyond this conversation about fraud. And in fact, I would draw the attention of members to the recent Technical Advisory Council report, which was just published within the last week under Section 3 on page 9. There are a number of recommendations, particularly under 3.1 and 3.2 about data sharing that come as recommendations from that body. That is a public, private, and agency-led partnership of folks who have put forward information. I also want to mention here that this is also important because we know 65% of our Fortune 100 companies do this, as well as 80 federal agencies in 31 states. And while Minnesota law is really great at protecting people's identities and their data, unfortunately, it is not created in such a way that helps facilitate sharing. So I strongly recommend a yes vote on this particular provision. Thank you.
Representative Quam, did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Frankly, for the last several years in the Legislative Audit Commission, we have been discussing and working with the commissioners on this very topic. They have a initial database that they're utilizing for sharing, and I think that the exact verbiage and crafting of this language should be done after discussion with the legislative auditor and the activity that's going on, because there have been some improvements in the sharing of, I guess, suspected and then already flagged fraud, so that now when we're doing an audit in a hearing and I ask how many have been, they could give me a number so that they are in the process. So it might be quicker if language is compatible with the process that's already been implemented. But I guess if you people want to go with this instead of something more concrete that's been evolving, you can vote for it. I'm going to vote no.
And Representative Norris, I'm sure I can commit you to working with Representative Quam and others to address this. It is the chair's intent to put this on. I think that there's obviously more committee stops to hit along the way, and you can maybe tighten that up after you maybe chat with Representative Quam offline. And you're shaking your head yes.
Happy to do that, Chair
Thank
Nash.
you, Representative Norris. Roll call having been requested on the A6, roll call will be granted. Clerk will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
Yes.
Representative Cleaborn.
Yes.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Bonner.
Aye.
Representative Anderson. Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg. Yes. Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy. Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Luger Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam.
No.
Representative Sexton.
Yes.
There being 13 ayes and 1 nay, the amendment is adopted. Next before the committee, Representative Norris, is your A7 amendment to the A7.
Yes, all right, the A7 amendment, sorry, Chair Nash.
There's a lot of amendments, I
Got
know.
one ahead of you there.
Yeah.
So the A7 amendment is another one that's designed to try to help with the prevention piece and in making sure that each of these agencies is operating to the best of their ability to ensure program integrity. So it would allow the Office of the Inspector General to evaluate the performance of agencies in terms of adhering to best practices and procedures, recommend improvements if they're necessary, and then report to the legislature on those recommendations and implementation to make sure that it's actually being carried out.
And Representative Norris, I think that there's some good DNA here, but if you'll remember House File 3 that we had in this committee and you weren't here, actually does accomplish a good majority of those things and its existing statute now. The OLA was in my office, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and met with me, giving me an update, and I'm sure you've read that report as to the things that have been implemented, are partly implemented, and not implemented. And I did hear from a couple of commissioners that were actually quite grateful for House File 3. So if I could ask you maybe to, and I'll work with you on this one, to tighten that up so that it doesn't actually cross wires with House File 3's efforts. So for this one, I'm happy to put it to a vote, or maybe you would like to withdraw the amendment and continue to working with me. Chair Cleaborn is telling you no. That's fine. Questions to the A7? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
No.
Representative Cleaborn.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
No.
Representative Bonner.
Aye.
Representative Anderson. Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg. Yes. Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy. Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Luger Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam. Representative Sexton.
No.
There being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Norris, to your A8, which is now before the committee.
Thank you, Chair Nash. This one, we're switching it up a little bit. We're going back to the independence theme of the office. And this is one that I'm hoping the House should like. Under the Senate version of the bill, if there is an effort to remove the Inspector General, only the Senate would get a say in that. Only the Senate would get to vote. This amendment gives the House a voice in this process. It would require approval of 3/5 of the Senate and 3/5 of the House in order to remove this person. This is similar to kind of an impeachment. In an impeachment proceeding, both the House and the Senate have a say, and so I think it's only appropriate that that both bodies have a say in removal of an Inspector General to, again, provide the greatest degree of independence for this entity.
Thank you, Representative Norris. This is one where I would encourage you to continue working with the stakeholders. I think I had some questions and some pushback on it from people. So I'm going to recommend a no vote, but I think that there's a lot to work with here, that if you seek out the counsel of others, we might be able to get to something that looks a lot like this. So questions, Representative Quam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm confused if this 10th engrossment language is actually accurate, because on 530 it says it includes both the Senate and the House, but the author of the amendment stated in his testifying that only the Senate would be involved, so
What he said.
I think the amendment is flawed, or at least if the author didn't realize the exact wording of the actual bill, it's not quite ripe to
Representative
make
Norris.
the amendment.
Yeah, Chair Nash, Representative Cuomo, I appreciate that clarification. It's actually the moving it to 3/5, which is the difference here. So yes, both the Senate and the House are involved, but it would move it to a 3/5 requirement. Again, trying to get to that independence. If we're requiring a higher threshold, presumably there needs to be some bipartisan consensus that this person is
So just for
not-
clarification, Representative Norris, you are upping the threshold in your desired amendment.
Correct.
Okay, so once again, I think that there's a lot to be talked about there. Want to make sure that we do that. So the chair will be recommending a no vote. But again, not because I don't think there's merit there, but because I want you to have deeper conversations with the other stakeholders. Seeing no other questions, Representative Koznick.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't want to belabor it, but I wanted to help understand what the author's intent is. I like that you have both bodies of the legislature involved. Can you just give me some guidance on your thought process of going to 3/5 and really the whole thought process of having the guardrails in here that this does?
Representative Norris.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Nash and Representative Koznick. So, yeah, again, we want to make sure that this office is as independent as possible while still staying within those constitutional guidelines. And so, as I've talked to lots of different people, both sides of the aisle, legislative branch, executive branch, people outside the Capitol, about how do we best make this work and ensure that independence while staying within the constitutional guidelines. One of the ideas we came up with is, make it a rigorous process in order for this person to be removed. We have, I don't know how far I want to go down this line, but we have seen cases where inspectors general have been removed outside of Minnesota's jurisdiction. For at times what seem like political reasons, and we want to avoid that. So one of the ways that we can avoid that is by putting as many safeguards in place for removal as possible. So requiring both the House and Senate to have a say is one, but then upping that threshold to an even higher level, rather than just requiring a simple majority, require 3/5. It's Minnesota is, typically our legislative bodies are pretty closely divided. If you can get 3/5 to agree on something, then there's probably, a clear case that this person who is in this role has not performed up to the expectations of the office.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you. And that's kind of along the lines I was thinking. I think the 3/5 threshold may be a little bit too high of a bar, but trying to avoid the partisanship, I would encourage, as you continue to work on this, maybe to revise the language or at least have the discussion with the other authors to just incorporate, and I think you probably could, that it needs to be bipartisan in nature by maybe at least 5 votes or something of the minority party, because we don't know what the composition will be in the future of certain legislatures. And you could have, a trifecta or something, but if you had buy-in from other parties, you could still achieve the accountability that we're looking for and not have it be partisan if you just work with the language instead of just a simple 3/5 or a certain percentage that you're trying, that's currently incorporated in this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Koznick. Representative Norris, I hope that we can continue to work on this. I think Representative Koznick makes some excellent points. And again, having heard from other folks, they would like to talk to you about that as well. So seeing nothing else discussion-wise, the clerk will take the roll on the A8.
Chair Nash.
No.
Representative Cleaborn.
Cleaborn, aye.
Representative Davis.
No.
Representative Bonner.
Aye.
Representative Anderson.
Anderson, no.
Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg. Yes. Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy.
No.
Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam.
No.
Representative Sexton.
No.
There being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Representative Norris, we're there. The A9 is now before the committee. To the A9.
At long last, Chair Nash. The last amendment, this one goes back to that prevention theme. This is pretty straightforward. It would task the Office of the Inspector General or give them the power to establish appropriate prepayment review procedures for all agencies to make sure that we are preventing fraudulent dollars from going out the door in the first place.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Norris. Again, one of those things that I think merits conversation with the additional stakeholders. I love the intent. We're trying to get ahead of prepayment. I just want to make sure that we're having that conversation with the other stakeholders, and nothing to say that this may or may not be engrossed as written, but I really feel at this time, having heard from a number of people who did not have the opportunity to weigh in, that they would like to do so. So I'm going to recommend a no vote on this. Seeing no conversations or questions, the clerk will take the roll on the A9.
Chair Nash.
Nope.
Representative Cleaborn.
Cleaborn, aye.
Representative Davis.
No.
Representative Bonner.
Aye.
Representative Anderson.
Anderson, no.
Representative Clardy.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Joy. Representative Koznick. Representative Kraft.
Aye.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
Aye.
Representative Quam.
No.
Representative Sexton.
No.
There being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Okay, so Representative Norris, to Senate File 856 as amended. We have some testifiers that we'd like to come to the table and join you. There is Superintendent Evans, then we have Representative Anderson for some brief comments, and then we have Jody McCarthy on deck. Welcome to the committee. Superintendent Evans, please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Mash and members of the committee. My name is Drew Evans. I'm the superintendent at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. I thank you for your continued work on this really important matter as we all collectively work to combat fraud, waste, and abuse in government programs. As I think you've debated and discussed extensively in a number of different forums, it's really important to get this right so that the money that you allocate to go to Minnesotans in need goes exactly where it should be. What I've been asked to discuss a little bit today is a component of the bill that remains in the version that you're contemplating right now, and that is the law enforcement powers and the law enforcement entity that's being created in the Inspector General's office. I do think it's important to note, as this traveled over from the other body, that was amended onto the bill, onto the floor, and we have expressed, as that bill was debated, in the Senate, some of the concerns that we would have, not because an important law enforcement function is not necessary for effective component of doing this particular work, but because of how it was being created and where it resided. I should note for all of you out of the gate that last year you passed and codified the combination of the Commerce Fraud Bureau and the BCA's Financial Crimes Unit into one cohesive unit that now operates out of the BCA. Part of that combination was creation of that unit into one section that now works daily to combat insurance fraud across the insurance industry, wage theft, traditional financial crimes, and state program fraud. That section now is identified efficiencies, and we're in the process of even adding additional resources to that group to combat all of those across the spectrum that are really important. Fraud is becoming, it is and remains an important or a significant issue, not only in state program fraud, but we're seeing it in all different aspects of our communities. You've probably experienced this in your own lives. I know I have. And so it's really important to have the expertise based within those. That section is comprised, once we add the additional personnel, of 46 FTEs. So it's a fairly large section within the BCA combating all those different aspects. In addition, there was reporting that is required to state agents, from state agencies to that when there's particular thresholds hit, in addition to the executive order that was there. Our concern that we've expressed with that in the Inspector General is there has to be a strong investigative function. That needs to be important on any central Inspector General office. But what is important to have when we look at these functions and state program fraud in particular is that there is a civil regulatory investigative process, and when criminal fraud is identified, it would be then moved over to the criminal investigators to examine that, to hold those individuals accountable. Running a police agency is incredibly complex, and it's becoming more and complex daily, weekly, for all the different regulations that are being placed upon us. Everything from equipment, from managing body cams, to fleets, to all the training that goes in, from the required training that this legislature's placed upon law enforcement across the state, to everything that goes into managing complex case loads and complex investigations. In addition, it's really important, as you've seen, to have strong partnerships with our federal authorities, which the BCA already has and continues to have. And so I want to be clear when we say this, is that the aspects of what we're referencing in this is that the criminal investigative function, really, we don't want to see confusion. We want to make sure that that's there, that that's important along the way, and that we also make sure that there is a civil regulatory investigative component, that both of those working together is how we best address fraud as it travels through any of our state programs. And I'd be happy to answer any questions from any members. Chair Nash.
Yep. Thank you, Superintendent Evans. Members, quick question for the superintendent. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Evans, for coming. And can you, maybe I just missed this, and I was trying to pay attention because I think this is really important, making sure that we have the criminal investigative portion. So are you saying, can you clarify, are you saying that you would like, I guess, would you rather have a criminal investigation component within the OIG or outside of it within your current office?
Superintendent.
Representative Nash and Representative, what I'm referencing is you already have the criminal investigative component at the BCA with the large financial crimes and fraud section that investigates the criminal matters. But I also want to be clear continuously that a strong civil regulatory investigative component with any inspector general's office is really important to have as well. They're two separate and distinct processes, but they work collaboratively together. And certainly we'll continue to be open as you debate and discuss these bills if there's ways to ensure that collaboration is ongoing and continuous, but there is statutory framework already identifying with this section the responsibilities for state program fraud.
Follow-up, Representative Jones, or are we good? Representative Koznick.
Thank you, and Director Evans, thanks for your work overall as we've talked on many things. Can you, I appreciate your comments, but I also appreciate what we have, that we have a more independent investigative entity within the framework that we're discussing. How independent is the BCA from the executive branch?
Superintendent.
Representative Nash and Chair Nash and Representative Koznick, I apologize. The BCA, I'm certainly appointed by a commissioner in this process. Me particularly, I'm the only appointed position within the BCA. I also think it's important. I've never been directed on any investigation by any governor. I've worked for 2 different governors, 3 different commissioners on our work, and I consider our work to be critically important to be done in a nonpartisan, independent way, and that's what builds trust for Minnesotans across Minnesota.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you. And I appreciate those comments. I think the challenge is there is a lack of trust in the public right now, and there should be, and in the legislature, of how government functions. When we have $9 billion worth of fraud, this is in here a separate entity to investigate and enforce because there is that lack of trust. The governor's office has been operating for almost 7 years, in its 8th year. Previous to that, a similar administration, and this has been allowed to fester and not really have been addressed until more recently. And so, while I appreciate the director's comments about independence, and I'm not trying to impugn that, but I think the trust of the public demands that we really make sure we get this right.
Superintendent, briefly.
Chair Nash, Representative Koznick, I hear you and appreciate that, and I work daily to build trust. We've done that in a number of different programs. I think there are multiple ways to do that. One of those is to build within this framework, if we continue to do the criminal investigations of this work, ways for oversight or access to our files so that they have that ability on an ongoing basis, so that they have that function built in based on how this Inspector General, certainly open to how to do that, to make sure there is that kind of watchdog component over our investigations, and certainly would be open to that in this process, and I think that would help build trust for everybody in this.
Representative Koznick, good. Superintendent, thank you for being here. I have asked Representative Anderson to be here. She's going to come forward. As you know, she's been a collaborator on all these efforts, and I think that she had something brief to say along the lines of wanting to make sure that we get this done right, because I believe that we all feel strongly about the OIG bill. So Representative Anderson, welcome to the committee. Briefly.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. So thank you for having us. Thank you for bringing up this bill again. And I want to thank all the parties that have worked on this over the last, over a year now, over a year. We started back in January, Senator Gustafson and myself, and eventually brought in the House Democrats when they came to work. So, and we have created a wonderful bill. As you know, House File 1 was originally running as a companion, not technically, because this is a companion legally, but was running through all the committees. And we were changing our bill, as Senator Gustafson was also changing her bill, every time we agreed to things. It was a great process, and we came up with a great bill, Senate File 856, or 486. There are these minor tweaks that need to be made as we review the entire bill, minor tweaks. Some of these amendments can work, potentially. There are also a few amendments that need to be looked at in judiciary, some data practices stuff, the stuff with the D1, that should be looked at in judiciary. I know we have some things with the legislative auditor. I think the Senate has a minor thing. So these are little tweaks that we can put on as we go through committees, if we're allowed to go through committees. So we have to keep this as a process the way it's been. We have to do this collaboratively. We can't just go off on our own. Because that's the only way this is going to pass. And we need to get this done. You all saw O'Malley's press conference yesterday. He talked, it's a great roadmap for fraud if you want to read a 80-page document. It's fantastic. And in there, he also talked about the Inspector General's office and how this needs to be independent. So we need to get this done, come together, and we are going to start meeting as a working group. Again, hopefully no later than Monday of next week, and we can work out all these things, bipartisan, bicameral. So thank you, and please vote yes. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. Thank you for your commitment to this issue. Thanks for working with all the stakeholders. I believe Chair Cleaborn has something brief she'd like to say, but as we move forward, please do, everybody, if you have an input, make sure that you let some of the folks who've been working on this. So. Representative Jones, we'll let you go first, and then we'll wrap with Representative Cleaborn, and then we'll go to our next testifier after that. Representative Cleaborn. Or Representative Jones, sorry. More caffeine necessary.
Let's go to the testifier first, and just when we wrap up, I'd like to talk.
Very well. Is yours concluding as well, Chair Cleaborn?
Well, I would just like to thank Representative Anderson. I know that you put in a ton of work, and I just want to acknowledge that work. And I want to acknowledge your commitment to making sure that the bill is right. So I just want to say that publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Cleaborn. Next testifier, we have Jody McCarthy. Please introduce yourself for the record and who you're with, and then proceed with your testimony.
Okay, thank you, Chair Nash and committee, for allowing me to speak. I'm a citizen. I'm here as a citizen. So I'm representing any citizen who wants to be represented. I am for having an office of the Inspector General because we need something. But I really think we need to examine an office that we already have. We have the MMB, we have the Minnesota Management Budget Commissioner, and she testified before the Fraud Committee, telling us that she didn't really think she had the power to do much of anything. And she couldn't take care of making sure there's accountability in this fraud. And I listened to her testimony, and I believe she said what she believed in earnest. But if you look at the legislation that was written, creating that position, it is the most powerful position the state has under governor. That position was designed to help people when they falter. It was designed to understand both the budget and the human resources needed for every project that we have, every agency that we have. And it's given the ability to hire who they need to hire to shore up any shortfalls that we have. So if you need to bring in somebody that's an expert in the field, you can for a time. And all of that was written in this legislation that created that position. I believe if we look at that position and shore it up to be what the people who wrote that legislation, I bow to. I don't think there's better legislation written in the state of Minnesota than that position. I think if we shore that up and we use it the way it's meant to be used, we would need less work done by the Inspector General. Now, I believe we need an Inspector General, so I don't want to poo-poo that. But that's a corrective position. I want to, the Budget and Management and Budget Committee isn't as much a corrective position as it is a supportive position. It is us saying we've been mandated by the legislature to create an agency to do something that our people need, and this is the human resource element they need, this is the money they need, and I'm going to oversee it, and we're going to work together to make it happen. By the time you get into the Inspector General, we're talking punitive. We're talking about having to, and that should be a smaller piece. So I encourage us to, I contacted Erin Campbell after she spoke and let us know that she really felt that she wasn't empowered to do all the things that she's legislatively mandated to do. And I volunteered. I said, you know, I worked as the executive secretary for Mayor Cheryl Belton when she was in office. I've done many things. I said, I'll volunteer to work for you. You don't even have to pay me. But we do need to do something to make your office what it's meant to be. So if anyone has, I mean, I am no one and everyone, right? I'm the self-governing citizen. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer anything.
Well, Ms. McCarthy, I'll disagree with you. You're not no one. You're a member of the public. We're here to serve you, and we're glad that you're here in committee today. Your voice matters, and I don't think that there are 14 members of this table that would disagree with what I just said. So we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Members, we have a couple of things. We've got a couple members to 856 as amended. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the recent testifier and any people in the public, if you look at the hearings on the audits, you'll see a lot of suggestions for how to correct and improve, and the MMB has been involved in that and has not implemented the vast majority of the improvements. And the auditor does a great job of finding problems, and the Inspector General office would actually be able to do enforcement. That's the thing lacking, is there hasn't been enforcement when things have been found. So thank you, just clarifying.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just want to first start off by saying, thank you to the bill author, thank you to Representative Anderson, and for everyone who's been digging in on this. I think we all agree that no one wants public dollars to be used irresponsibly. Every dollar that is not used responsibly, is used fraudulently, is one that is not going to a senior who needs health care or to someone experiencing homelessness and getting that shelter. So this conversation has been really important. I know we're all a little on edge, a little tense, a little frustrated, but I think this is important. I'm really thankful to everyone who's committed to continue working on this in a bipartisan fashion and bicameral fashion. I do just want to mention a couple of, as you can continue that work, I want to mention a couple of concerns that I have that I hope you'll take into consideration as you continue working on this. One is just kind of some duplication, as Representative Quam has talked about. So the OLA has kind of been doing some of these they do a lot of investigation, which is really important. And I worry about the duplication with an OIG. And so how can we make sure that we're not doing that duplicative work? Because duplication means that we're paying twice for something, and we want to use our money responsibly, again, going back to the original comment. And then similarly with the BCA, I want to make sure that we're avoiding duplication there too. So we need accountability, we need effectiveness, we need cost effectiveness as well. And the last piece is that I cannot support a bill that isn't constitutional. And so although I really would like to move this forward today, it's not something I can support because I have that concern of this does need to line up with what we know from constitutional scholars to, meet our constitutional needs.
Chair Cleburne, closing comments before we go to a vote?
Thank you very much. And Chair Nash, thank you for bringing the bill back forward. I think it has been a good and robust conversation. So I'm really thankful that you did that. So I want to tip my hat to you there. Also, one more time, I would like to thank Representative Anderson for her work. She said this started in January, but I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. It was January 2025. So we have been at this for quite some time. Representative Norris, I want to take the opportunity to thank you. One, I know that you and the senator have a very close relationship. I know that you and the senator have had many conversations, and not all of them were kumbaya moments, right? So I want to thank you for that hard and difficult work. But I also want to talk about your focus on prevention. I think when we all know, everyone knows, when you have good policies, good procedures, the right people in place, we don't have fraud, or we minimize risk in fraud. And so that prevention, the training, all of those pieces are so important. The other thing I want to thank you for is being someone who will stand up and say, we deserve a House position. This is our work. We do our work, and you're willing to do that work. And I appreciate the fact that the senators in the other body voted for this bill as they best saw fit. But I went back and I looked at the dates of when each of those senators would have looked at the bill. And I also went back and looked at the engrossments. And I saw how even when this bill passed judiciary, it was only on its 6th engrossment. And we are now working off the 10th, talking about modifying it to an 11th, and then by the chair and testimony today, we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 places where there is massive work yet to be done to get to consensus. And so for me, this is an indication that the work needs to continue. And I agree with Representative Anderson. I read the report from Mr. O'Malley. It's an awesome framework. And now that we have that information to build this office upon, I think we should incorporate that information. And to Representative, or Co-Chair Nash, my partner in this work, you know, we have had conversations about the importance of using technology to do this work. Technology is not even mentioned in your DE or in the Senate's work. I think it's something that we need to think about. And when we're talking about fully funding, it's not robbing employees from other divisions. It's making sure that the employees stay within the division to do the work, to do the tasks that they are charged with in that division, as well as having a fully staffed and fully operational OIG that is, as we have both said a million times, is independent. We need that independence. So members on our side, it is very clear from the conversation that we had today that this bill is not quite ready. We've heard repeatedly that four-party conversation will still continue. I ask that we, on our side, allow that work to continue. And when this bill is ready, we can give it a yes vote. But for today, the conversation is clear that this bill is not ready and it is not, the House work is not yet completed. And I want to make sure that if Representative Norris has closing comments, he has an opportunity to have those as well. Thank you, Chair Nash.
Madam Chair, I'll get to Representative Norris here in just a second. Representative Koznick had a comment.
We have a roll call too? Thank you,
Yes.
just making sure, thanks.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. And we had really a good discussion that was lacking earlier last week. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing us to vet the bill, the author's proposed amendments, and I think we did good work today. But the mental gymnastics to justify not passing this bill to the next committee on this important policy that all Minnesota should be paying attention to and is demanding us to take action, is just mind-boggling. The mental gymnastics to say we need to keep the bill here and not continue to work on it throughout other areas and committees in the legislature is incredible. In fact, it's fraud about fraud that the Democrats are talking out of both sides of their mouth. I have members in my district, as I'm sure you all do across the whole state, that expect us, this is priority number one for us as a legislature. Republicans are saying, yes, we're going to address fraud because our taxpayers and citizens demand it. We are in a point in our state where the trust in legislature is really low. And when you do this mental gymnastics about not passing the bill forward and you're tough on fraud, but then you vote no, is amazing. Members and people in the public that are watching in my district, this is a top priority. I'm voting yes.
Representative Davis, briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Senate File 856 had bipartisan support. And Representative Norris, I would think that with a tie in the House, you bring forth an amendment that is going to completely change this bill, and you didn't work with a single Republican on it in a tied House. To me, that's reprehensible. And now Democrats are about to kill the bill on Office of Inspector General.
Representative Cleburne, your closing comment. Representative Cleburne, very briefly.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that everybody is really clear. The OIG bill is alive and well. It is in committee. We don't recess until May. There is lots of opportunity to get this bill right. There is no Democrat willing to kill this bill, but we are interested in making sure that it's the right bill, that it's constitutional, and that there is prevention and good best practices within this office. So with that, members, I'm going to ask that this bill stay in committee while we do that good work, and it is alive and well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
One moment. I'm gonna, the co-chair has spoken. We're going to go to my comments, then I'll give you the last comment unless there's something absolutely vital that we have to talk about. But here's what I'll say. Last week, we didn't get to have a voice in, well, anything. And today, I have given everybody the opportunity to talk. We've used almost the balance of our entire committee time. We have commended some of the work. We have engrossed some of the amendments. Let's not make any mistake. I agree with Representative Koznick. I believe his words were mental gymnastics. One might actually say the word kabuki. I think that what we're seeing here is a need to move this bill on. This bill has broad bipartisan support. It has come over from the Senate with an exceptionally strong Senate position. We have engrossed amendments into it on a 14-0 vote. We have said that there are other amendments that have great merit. I don't know what else is required because the argument is, well, we'd like to keep it here to continue working and we have time, but there are other committees that have said that they would like to see these amendments and see this bill because it has jurisdiction over it. The referral that I think I may have made, but I didn't, I'll reiterate it. My referral is to send this to Judiciary where it needs to be reviewed as well. There's plenty of time. I believe my co-chair has upon time said that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can pass this out, send it to Judiciary, let them do the same level of work that we have here today, or we can hold it in committee, keep it hostage, not let it go anywhere. So those are your choices today, members, to move it along the process. Tell Minnesotans that you're serious about fraud. tell Minnesotans that you believe that the office of OIG is important and something that they, as honestly, the victims of fraud, should be able to see become reality this legislative session. Or you can choose to leave this bill here in committee, congratulate yourselves for whatever you'd like to congratulate yourself for, but I view this as something that is necessary to get to the next stop. Representative Norris, very briefly to your bill as amended with a recommendation to pass this on to judiciary.
Thank you, Chair Nash, and to the members of the committee for a good conversation today. And we've talked a little bit here lately about the history of the bill. The history of the bill actually dates back to December 2024, when Senator Gustafson gave me a call and said, hey, you know, I'm thinking about this idea of an independent office of the Inspector General. Do you want to work with me on this? And I said, absolutely. I'd be happy to work on this on the House side with you. And we've had a whole cast of characters come in along the way. Representative Anderson does deserve a ton of credit. We've worked with a lot of members on both the House and the Senate side, and I think we've made good progress, but we're not there yet. Importantly, we're not even to a point yet where everybody agrees that this bill is constitutional, and I do think it's reasonable for the State Government Committee to have consensus on that. At the very least, before advancing it. So, you know, I'm committed to getting this bill across the finish line. First step as the House author is getting it through the House, so I'm going to be working on achieving that, figuring out a bill that can get through the House. We can take it to conference if necessary, and then we'll pass it into law, and we'll make sure that this office can get down to the really important business that it needs to do for Minnesotans.
Thank you, Representative Norris. With that, the chair renews his motion that Senate File 856 as amended be referred to the Judiciary Committee. The clerk will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
Aye.
Representative Cleaborn.
Cleaborn, no.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Bonner.
No.
Representative Anderson.
Anderson, aye.
Representative Clardy.
No.
Representative Freiberg. No. Representative Jones.
No.
Representative Joy. Yes. Representative Koznick.
Cosmic, yes.
Representative Kraft.
No.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
No.
Representative Quam.
Yes.
Representative Sexton.
Yes.
Astoundingly, there being 7 ayes and 7 nays, the bill is not passed out of committee. It will not be heading to judiciary, and we will not see any progress. So